Good. All right, so we are in the Zoom lobby. This is fantastic. So next up, we have a really interesting uh, conversation with Christian Bonilla, and we are going to be talking about transforming natural gas into Bitcoin. And I'm going to go ahead and pull this up. I need to get it on bigger. My eyes are getting old at this late in the day, and I need it a little bit bigger than what it is. So I want to introduce Christian, but first off, if you have questions about natural gas and how we can turn that into Bitcoin, make sure you put those questions in the chat as they come up, because I know we talk about a lot of different things throughout the event, and sometimes you forget them, and so make sure that you put your comments and everything into the chat so that we can make sure we get those questions answered for you. Remember, we're going to have a mining mafia meetup on March 26th, and that is at Mining Disrupt in Fort Lauderdale. We'd love to see you there, so be sure to join us. And with that, I'd like to introduce our guest today. And we're going to be talking about natural gas into Bitcoin. And Christian Bonilla is an accomplished product leader and successful founder with experience spanning from 0 to 1 startups to public companies. And he loves building products customers. He's excited about building products customers love and building successful organizations. And believes that a well-defined, clearly communicated long-term vision and strategy empowers everyone in the organization to bring their full creativity and enthusiasm to their jobs and do their best work and within their careers. And with that, I will be bringing up Christian. Let's see if we can find him. Panelists and move to webinar. There we go. Should be coming and joining us shortly. And we're going to be talking about natural gas and Bitcoin. And there he is. There we go. How are we doing today, Christian?
Hey, John, I'm well, thanks. How are you?
Fantastic. This is it's turning out to be a really good day here at the virtual conference. We've had guests all day since 8 o'clock this morning, and we've been talking about Bitcoin and really talking about how small miners can take advantage of opportunities that are out there, and how people can get into the big Bitcoin mining business. And ultimately, my cause is how we can add another zero to the value of Bitcoin through education and connecting with others. What you're talking about today is, this is the thing that I'm most excited about is turning natural gas into Bitcoin. And when we talked earlier about what you were talking about, there's really an unlimited supply of gas, of this power out there. So when we're looking for that Bob Burnett talked about that prime mining power under 5 cents. Where can we find that? I mean, you can't you can't mine enough. You can't put enough miners up to take up all this gas. And a
Mhm.
lot of it's with innovation. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation. But first off, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm glad you're excited. Delighted that you guys asked us at DMARC to participate. And yeah, hopefully we can have a good conversation. I kind of put together some thoughts to walk through that's really meant to kind of be a practical introduction to Bitcoin mining with natural gas. For folks that are kind of new to it or considering it and just sort of getting their heads around the opportunity because it's obviously its own domain. There's a lot to it. So, hopefully we can make it a little bit less scary and also point out, sort of where there are things to drill into and but also, just how to consider the opportunity and sort of decomplexify it a little bit.
Right.
I think I like to say it's complicated, meaning it's a lot of steps, but it's not complex. Figuring out what you want to do with your life is complex. This is
Yeah.
just complicated.
So tell me, before we get started, tell us a little bit about what DMARC does and what your role there is.
Sure. So I'm the co-founder and CEO of DMARC. I think you introduced me before I joined, but I have a 20-year background in software, about 10, 12 years of that building analytics software, and so very acquainted with the sort of challenges of high performance compute going back to, kind of several cycles ago. DMARC we founded really because we saw originally, we've kind of expanded our aperture a bit, but our sort of original um reason for starting the business was seeing these sort of very manual and kind of hand-to-hand nature by which Bitcoin miners and natural gas producers were were doing business, and just the friction that was involved in them trying to do so, both because of the steps that are involved, but also just the mutual, I think, lack of understanding on both sides, between Bitcoin miners and folks who are really thinking about that ecosystem and, kind of focused on hash rate and, very operationally sensitive to cost. And then on the other side, the independent oil and gas producers who, there is a subset of them that are philosophically, I think, aligned and in step with Bitcoin and decentralized finance generally. But I started a marketplace several years ago that ended up being acquired in the software testing space. There are some kinds of marketplaces where you bring both sides together, and that's a lot of the work that needs to be done, right? Here, there's finding the right buyers and sellers on the energy production and the compute offtake side. But there's just a lot of other things that need to come together to make those energy projects work, especially in an off-grid setting. And so what we're trying to do with DMARC is not just bring those two sides together in an efficient marketplace with, kind of pre-vetting and things like that, but also the other kind of support providers, equipment providers, and folks like that, and just bring everything together, hopefully to make those projects easier to catalyze, because we believe that there's so much value kind of waiting to be unlocked between these two sides. And, ultimately, marketplace businesses exist to take friction out of transactions. And so, our North Star for success is how much more can we help unlock, and how many more of these projects can we connect, bringing compute workloads and energy together. That's what we're for.
That's a fantastic explanation. So you have a presentation that you're going to go through the exciting world of natural gas and Bitcoin, and I know that our audience is going to be excited about this one because there's so much opportunity, and I'm really looking forward to it. So what I'll do is I will let you go and do your presentation, and then we'll be all set.
If I can just hide the meeting controls. Great. I should mention that I'm based out of Denver, Colorado. At the moment, I'm in Barcelona, Spain, because after a few glasses of wine about 8 months ago, my wife and I decided to say yes to an invitation for my son to do a soccer camp here and train with the FC Barcelona coaches and a bunch of other kids from across the state. So it's great for him. He's missing an unforgivable amount of school. It's completely ridiculous. But fortunately, this is not uh, a presentation on parenting strategies and how to raise well-adjusted children. But yeah, so it'll be about midnight by the time we finish here. So, but I'm coffeeed up and ready to go. So,
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you doing this, and that's such
oh,
a
it's my
fantastic
pleasure.
story. I admire what you're doing, and let's take a look.
Sure. Um, Well, like I said, we kind of talked about DMARC already. So again, we exist to kind of bring these sides together, whether it's high performance computing, in our case, Bitcoin mining, energy providers, whether they're off-grid natural gas, folks on-grid with excess power, those with substations in their portfolio, whatever it might be. And then in particular, the sort of equipment vendors and service providers, the other folks whose technical expertise kind of makes these systems work. But I won't belabor the point there. So before we get into the sort of how a bill becomes a law with transforming natural gas and British thermal units into kilowatts, into hash rate, there's just a very basic set of kind of core things to know just about natural gas that I think is useful to kind of inform the what follows from this. So this is the shortest primer that we can kind of put together on this, but I always say, if not now, when, right? We have to cover this at some point, and it's worth just kind of understanding. But I'll make this painless. So again, just recognizing that this will be review for some, but hopefully for others, it's useful to get this kind of just basic first principles grounding on natural gas. So when we talk about natural gas and when natural gas is extracted from whatever source, the key ingredient that they're looking for is methane, dry gas, right? There are other useful compounds that come out of the ground, butane, ethane, propane, and other impurities, but really what they're after is methane. That is the true fuel source as far as we're concerned here. I'm going to be glossing over, bits of this here. So for folks that have questions at the end, I'm happy to come back to anything here. The reason it's such a widespread and widely used fuel source is one, it's abundant. It's also extremely energy dense, just a very efficient fuel source, even compared with gasoline or diesel or renewables. Nothing against those. It's just this happens to be a very effective store of energy. And in terms of levelized cost of energy, it ranks among the very highest, which is why it's such a big part of our and many other countries' energy production mix. It's just a very cost-effective way to produce energy. Natural gas, like other hydrocarbons and fossil fuels, it's the result of millions of years of organic matter decomposing, getting compressed with heat and kind of decaying. The gas, when it's produced, it starts to rise as gases do, and it settles into rock formations throughout the Earth's crust in places where it gets trapped and it can't permeate the rock anymore. And you get these reservoirs of natural gas, and that is when we're drilling for gas, what is being tapped into. The U.S. doesn't have the world's largest reserves, but it's up in that very top tier. The U.S. is the largest producer, which is one of the reasons, again, why when we look at opportunities, across the United States, and I think we talk so much about the Permian and about Texas and Oklahoma, and there's still great opportunities there. But really is a nationwide resource, right? There are plays in the Northeast and the Midwest. It's really it's one of the more versatile energy sources in that sense. And extracting it, there are obviously conventional natural gas wells. We've probably seen before. There's fracking, which was a United States, at least homegrown innovation that allowed for more of these shale plays and horizontal drilling and capturing the gases that are trapped in different kinds of rock formations, and thus massively increasing the supply over the last 20 years. And then the other way that we come across lots of natural gas, and if it's hard to not come across the term when we're talking about gas as it relates to Bitcoin mining, is the associated gas, or the flare gas, as it's often called, because it's a byproduct of oil production. Not in every case, but it's a very common byproduct. How much of it comes out along with oil, varies from well to well. But it's the I think especially for our purposes, it's one of the most common sources of gas produced, or gas that's extracted from the earth. And so you can see just by way of comparison, when we talk about the sort of privileged and kind of fortunate position that we are in the United States, at least, relates to natural gas, there's just an abundance of it. And we'll get into, more about why there is quote unquote excess gas or stranded gas and kind of what that means. But that's just, the simplest kind of overview of the topic we can here. Um, Next kind of important point to understand, if you don't, is that dry gas is dependent on pipelines to be moved from place to place. Uh, Oil can obviously go by pipeline as well, but when need be, or for whatever reason, it can be loaded into tanks, put on trucks, put on tanker cars, and moved by rail. Gas does not have that kind of flexibility. It can be condensed into liquid natural gas and shipped around. There's costs involved in that. There's a lot of equipment that needs to be in place for that. By and large, dry natural gas relies on pipelines to be moved. So if a pipeline, and there are lots of examples, and sadly we see it's a very geopolitical thing too, and we talk about conflicts in Eastern Europe. But when pipelines go offline, the main large transmission pipelines, we have immediate economic disruption in terms of fuel availability. And then there are also cases where pipelines, I mean, they require maintenance, they are taken offline periodically. And then there are these smaller pipelines called gathering systems, which can sometimes, for different reasons, they're shut down or they're bought or decommissioned. And this is one of the ways that wells and gas production can become stranded. And because gas requires pipelines to be moved, gas production and pipeline development kind of go hand in hand because you need that offtake right there. There's really no other way to monetize it when you're pulling it out of the ground. You need that pipeline there that's ready to take it away. And this is why the associated gas that comes from oil production is such a problem and why there's so much innovation from Crusoe and 360 and a number of others who kind of seen the potential for flare gas reduction. Because without a pipeline or another offtake and way to use that gas, you can't just have it kind of floating around in the air. It's obviously dangerous. It's combustible. It has to go somewhere. And so that flaring is a result of not having a pipeline or other way of consuming and deploying that gas on site where oil is being produced. If you're drilling for oil and you're not building gas pipelines out there, if you've got more gas than you anticipated or even not, that's a problem that has to be dealt with, hence the flare gas opportunity. And so I'm not going to talk specifically about flare as much, but that's where that opportunity comes from. And that's why it exists. It's because of that pipeline dependency. And then I think lastly here, just some key measures to keep in mind. So when we talk about gas and just conversationally, when we reference it and when you see or you hear people talking about it, just to keep it as simple as possible, we can think of volume, quality of the gas, and the price. We generally talk about volume in terms of MCF or thousands of cubic feet. Um, you'll hear other terms for it as well. They generally reference heat quality. The heat quality of the gas is measured in BTUs, British thermal units, and it's British thermal units per cubic foot, or MBTU if you want to kind of level those out. What that's a measure of is the what's called the calorific quality of the gas. So gas that has been conditioned and is going through the pipeline meets what's called pipeline spec, and that's pretty consistent. And it happens to be about 1,000 BTUs, MBTUs per MCF. And so at that point, it's consistent. As it's coming out of the ground, and even from a single well over time, this can change. The actual heat quality of the gas will vary, as well as the other impurities or the things that might need to be extracted from it. So when we talk about the heat quality of the gas, some of it might be above pipeline spec, meaning that you can generate more heat per cubic foot of gas. The lower the heat quality, or the lower the quality, the lower the heat content of the gas, the less energetic or productive energetic power it has. And then in price, gas is generally priced by the MMBTU. The little asterisk there is almost probably even more commonly you'll hear people talk about dollars per MCF, and I'll use those kind of interchangeably here too, just because it's conversationally so common. It's technically incorrect because the price you really are paying for the heat quality of the gas. Just by a sort of a coincidence of the arithmetic, it just so happens that the two values are nearly the same for standard pipeline quality gas. So 1 MCF of natural gas happens to contain, you see at the bottom, 1.015, or it's nearly 1 to 1 in terms of MCFs and MBTU. So that's where that comes from. And then just some heuristics that are useful to keep in mind here. When we look at wells or well production or the volume of gas moving through a pipeline or a gathering system, um, again, assuming kind of that standard quality or close to it, every 300 MCF of gas produced translates to about a megawatt of electric power generation. And that's net power generation. So that's after it's gone through a generator set. And you've got the heat loss and the other things that kind of happen there. But that's a good rule of thumb. 300 MCF, give or take, yields 1 megawatt of electric power. So if you think of 1 megawatt for 24 hours a day, that's 24 megawatt hours per day. And then when we talk about the pricing of natural gas and how that translates into your energy costs, your net energy costs, for every dollar of cost on the gas side, you can add about a penny per kilowatt hour, give or take. And so that's a useful figure to keep in mind as you start kind of building up the fully loaded costs of electricity when you're using natural gas and you're generating power from it. All right. I feel like I want to pause and get questions. It's one of the challenges of virtual conferences sometimes. So kind of with that as preface, we'll shift and let's talk about how we actually go from gas coming out of the ground or whatever other source. I'm not talking, by the way, about renewable natural gas here. I'm really just limiting this to gas that's extracted in kind of the more conventional ways. Obviously, a lot of the math and the concepts hold. There's just a different kind of supply chain that comes into play. But how we go from BTUs to actual power that we can use for compute. So bird's eye view here. Oops, let me move this control. So we think of conventional natural gas play. We have gas that is coming out of the ground at what's called the wellhead, which is exactly what it sounds like. And that gas is generally the raw natural gas is coming out of the ground. It's treated on site, generally to remove other liquids and to basically get the gas conditionable and ready for transmission pipelines, which have their own specs that gas has to meet before it can be pushed along into the rest of the system. So we've got waste fluid removal, other things that kind of happen to sort of scrub the gas here. That's generally on site, kind of in the area where you have the wellbores themselves. And then that gas is fed into gathering lines and eventually to main transmission lines. Generally speaking, and again, I'm painting with a broad brush here, before we talk about gas that's being fed into the generators and onto a mining unit, most gas, again, because of the nature of what it takes to transport it, most gas is fed into either intrastate or interstate pipeline systems. And from there, it makes its way to either further refinement or into storage, compression for liquid natural gas sales, and in some cases, just directly to industrial customers that are consuming it on site. In this case, what's more interesting for us is the gas that is being fed into a generator set. So there are lots of different models of these at different price points and sizes. But here we're talking about gas that is being fed into a generator, where the heat energy of the gas, the combustion happens, that's transformed into kinetic energy and ultimately into electric power, which is then used to power the ASICs that are within a mobile mining container. I know I wasn't able to see the talk today, but I know that we had uh, Greenidge talking about their container units, and then I'm sure power consumption things came up in there. But kind of end to end, that's what happens, right? When we talk about uh, where a mining unit can be placed and where a genset can be installed. There are different places where you can do this that have their own kinds of pros and cons. So the closer you get to the wellhead itself, generally speaking, the cheaper the gas is going to be, but also the more variation you might have to deal with in terms of actual flow of gas, the quality of it coming out, as well as age. The composition tends to shift. I noted the flare point here. There's a flare valve for excess gas that is coming out. It's also true for associated gas. Obviously, there are solutions for taking the flare gas or the gas that would be flared at its source to dispose of it and feeding that into a genset. Obviously, there are solutions in market for that. There are also, sometimes when we talk about working with pipeline operators, or called midstream companies, as opposed to the gas producers themselves. So just kind of one step further downstream, branching off of a pipeline, and whether the gas has to be stepped down in pressure or not, that's another place where it can be fed into a genset and mobile mining setup. When you're buying from a midstream company, all things being equal, you're generally going to be paying a little bit more for the gas. The upshot is that the flow and quality is going to be pretty constant. So the closer you go to the source, the lower the cost, and the more operational variation you have to be able to kind of tolerate and factor into your kind of your internal return models. Um, and also the more kind of thoughtful you have to be about your equipment choices and uh, gen sets or turbines that are able to deal with dirtier gas or variations in flow and things like that, and that can be calibrated well for it. So those are things that kind of, that gets into, I guess, more the 200 or 300 level courses for this that we're not really touching right now. But just generally speaking, I think the important thing to take away is that there's more than one place. When we talk about mining with natural gas, it doesn't always mean that you have to be at the wellhead. I've mentioned gathering lines a few times as well. If you think of, a plot of land or set of acreage that has multiple wellheads on it, all operated by the same producer, those will have smaller lines coming out of them that maybe feed into a slightly larger pipe that takes it to whatever its eventual destination is. That's another place, and particularly with operators that own their own gathering systems, those tend to be very, I think, productive partners for Bitcoin miners because, again, you have multiple wells feeding into a single point that you can then feed the gas into a generator from. The more wells that are feeding that, the more volume there's likely to be. And also, if one wellhead is not producing or there are just operational issues, you've got sort of the redundancy, at the energy source level. So, from wellhead to gathering system to pipeline, there are different ways and cost strategies that you can factor into where you would end up siting the actual mining operation itself. And then those, would just be factored into your cost model. So you trade off maybe upfront price on the gas for more certainty of production and higher uptime. All right.
Got
Um,
a quick question. I
yeah,
wanted to just jump in because we're kind of in a good place right here. Uh, this might be a little bit advanced, but how dirty can the gas be uh, to get to the gas generator? Can it come right off of the wellhead and have H2S in it, or does the H2S always have to be cleaned out, or
it
what would that
depends
look
on the
like?
equipment that you're using. It's a really good question. So H2S, hydrogen sulfide, is probably one of the most common um, problem contaminants or impurities that come with natural gas. And basically, I think the short answer is uh, if your generator is calibrated and kind of designed to handle dirtier gas or heavier gas, it's not necessarily a problem. If the methane quality of the gas is lower, then your yield in terms of electricity per MCF is going to be lower. So it's really a question of having the equipment that is designed to handle dirtier gas and having it calibrated so that you're expecting that.
Okay.
Um, there are, you can get into lots of permutations of, um, pardon me, generator load percentage and how it's calibrated to actually handle that. And it goes into, I think generator systems in general. We're actually going to go into this kind of in the next slide that I'll just kind of talk to. 'Cause it does get deeper than we can go. You almost have to go case by case and say, all right, for this setup, what is the right solution for you? And I think that's kind of our point is that there's a um, there's a viable solution for almost every kind of scenario. Um, it's just a question then of do the unit economics tie out, and does it still kind of meet your internal rate of return and sort of what your alternatives are.
Mhm.
So short answer is um, yes, there are upper bound limits to uh, some of the impurities or other compounds that are tolerable for cost-effective power production from natural gas. But it comes down to hugely having the right equipment and people who know how to kind of tune it for that.
Okay.
Really good question. So this is a snapshot and actually an incomplete snapshot of just, what goes into understanding both the equipment that you're using and translating kind of everything about your environmental setup into understanding your hash rate output and what your fully loaded costs are going to be. I couldn't capture all of this here, but anyone who's working with you or selling a gen set, whether it's new, 0 hour, or used, should be able to give you the spec sheets for the equipment and actually take you through kind of scenario wise understanding what your actual power output is going to be because a generator set will have its kind of nameplate power capacity that it can put out, but that will change based on factors like altitude, like temperature, the quality of the gas coming in. And so there are online calculators for this. I haven't seen any that go into the level of depth that we do in sort of our offline calculations. We're going to bring those online, later this year. But basically, you can take the heat rate and the rated electrical output of a generator, the mining containers, the ASICs that you're going to be using, uh, and figure out based on whether you're starting from how much power you're trying to generate, how many ASICs you have that you're trying to energize. Whichever of those variables you have fixed first, you can then kind of fill in the rest. But it's about understanding for your generator what kind of load swings it can tolerate. What's the level of output that is going to sort of redline it over time, what's actually sustainable for prime power, how it derates based on some of those other environmental factors I mentioned. And then critically, it's easy from those kind of base variables to figure out, uh, per 100 or 1,000 MCF of gas going into it, what your power output is going to be. And thus, you know what you're paying for the gas, you can then figure out, all right, here's what our cost of power is going to be. The two key things that have to be factored in here, though, are one, what the maintenance costs will be for genset. It's equipment that does require maintenance over time. Um, the uptime and maintenance costs that you add in are where I think a lot of the scars that people bring into the stories they share from off-grid mining with natural gas come from. It's either not getting equipment that just uh, wasn't as capable as described or had maintenance issues that there are all kinds of ways that that can come up. This something might have been not used very much because it was in a reserve or a standby kind of emergency resiliency role, but it was outside for years and it has other, you really have to do your homework and work with trusted, kind of reputable dealers or manufacturers who also can, they'll usually bundle support and maintenance contracts for at least the first year, kind of depending um, on what kind of unit you're buying or how much of it or how many of them you're buying. But factoring in your total uptime assumptions and setting realistic assumptions for those, and what realistic is will depend on the kind of system you have in place. And then also just factoring in that there's an ongoing, maintenance kind of cost that is just part of maintaining the system. It doesn't mean it's not economical, far from it, but it just means that accurately understanding your fully loaded cost of power generation is the difference between seeing that, oh wow, I'm able to get the equivalent of 2.5 or 3 cent MCF. I'm sorry, 2.5 or 3 cent per kilowatt hour versus it might be 5, or it could be 6, or it could be more if you haven't really factored in and thought through how you're going to accrue for maintenance and things like that. So it's not brain surgery. It's really not. It's just about making sure that um, in your setup you understand that there are going to be certain costs and that you have the right system for your setup. We have we can go into kind of different versions of these, but the not having a transformer in place to kind of smooth out the harmonics, the issues between power generation and the container, that will create problems of its own as well. The key is how do you maximize uptime with predictable costs, right? And just simplifying it all, it's another piece of machinery in a return on capital business that just needs to be factored into your model and understood accordingly.
That's great.
Um,
Real quick, you talked about maintenance. Is there like a rule of thumb that you could give everybody for maintenance? Is it $100,000 per megawatt per year, or is it 50,000? I know the parts are a lot, and then you get the oil and the coolant, so it does add up.
it depends. I think I did have a rule of thumb for this. Let me see if I can pull it up while we go
Okay.
through the questions. But I think you know, adding in basically another penny and a half per kilowatt hour is probably good practice. But I'll find a better rule of thumb for that. I have it in my notes. I just neglected to put it in the slides. I'll grab that before we sign off. So just looking at time and to keep things moving, um, The other piece I just wanted to touch on today is just understanding who's on the other side of the transaction when you're using natural gas to power a Bitcoin mine. And that's assuming that you're not already a natural gas producer who's doing this on their own lease. So just as a kind of high level comparison, just to kind of look at the two, when we're talking about on-grid mining setups, you're generally working with either independent power producers, renewable energy developers, maybe the utility that acts as a middleman. On the natural gas side, it's most likely to be working with, and again, it depends on who you are. If you're Crusoe versus if you're, an independent operation, it's going to look different. But we look at and like to look at the independent oil and gas producers. So not the super majors, the international oil and gas companies that are vertically integrated, but rather the independents and the folks that have maybe between, you know, 5 and 50 wells. It can go up from there. There's a wide range of them. But it constitutes about, I don't know, give or take 20% of the total gas production market. That's from memory, so don't quote me on that, but that's a good sort of rule of thumb. Um, you may be working with a midstream company that again is operating a pipeline that may or may not cross state lines. And it's also possible that you might be buying the gas from what's called a gas marketing company, which is just the company that handles sort of the logistics and business end of selling and signing contracts with offtake partners for natural gas, and kind of taking that from the producer so they can focus on kind of the core of their operations. The mechanism by which you get it, I mean, again, the analog here is the power purchase agreement, which I think many of the folks on this call, if not all, will be familiar with. Here, the analog is it's called a gas purchase agreement. There are a good chunk of these, probably a decent majority follow fairly standard. There's an industry kind of standard term for how gas contracts and gas purchase agreements are structured. And so, in terms of site needs, we think about grid interconnects versus having wellhead or pipeline access, site access, and being able to actually like place down the container and the gen sets and things like that. Just kind of high level, I think when we kind of contrast pros and cons for each of these, the advantages on the grid side, I think, when we're talking about grid power, generally we think, stable and predictable. It's a structure that people are, by and large, more familiar with if they've dealt with this before, unless they've been kind of purely going through the hosting route. And the potential for taking advantage of curtailment incentives, right? One of the great benefits where it's available. The drawbacks on the grid side being one, just the sort of ferocious competition for capacity, and this sort of dead zones that we see, for certain megawatt allotments going forward. On the gas side, generally speaking, you can get a lower net power cost. You have to, find people that are kind of looking for pricing kind of in the range that sort of fits you. But as you said, John, at the very start, there's the open-ended expansion potential in particular, which is what makes it so appealing as grid interconnect queues, continue to be in this sort of years-long range, and I think land is increasingly becoming a challenge to acquire for many as well. So the drawbacks being, again, just that it requires some expertise and know-how for putting these systems together, and just being able to factor in the uptime or the production consistency, and just knowing how to sort of build that into your, not just your financial model, but your sort of operating model as well. And so lastly, just this is a rich topic as well, but just when we think about kind of the motivations on the independent producer side, the oil and gas operator, I think of these in just kind of in a few general buckets. So there's the financial motive for them to work with Bitcoin miners. Um, there's certainly the potential if they have we talked about physically stranded gas that might be cut off from a gathering system. Economically stranded is the other flavor of that, where for whatever reasons, their gas may be the price that they can get from their pipeline is too low to cover their operating costs, or they're barely operating at or above break even. And so there's certainly that motive. You'll find companies, especially ones that own gathering lines or have their own pipeline infrastructure, which is not uncommon, especially on the intrastate side. They just want to see more gas flowing through their pipes, through that infrastructure to just raise the overall value. If someday they choose to sell or they're entertaining offers, more gas flowing through their infrastructure means higher value of those assets, which is good for their business. They may be trying to monetize, land that um, has access to gas or has proven reserves on it that they want to be able to finance the development of. And also just the nature of pipeline construction and gas production means that often, actually probably more often than not in a lot of regions, the operator only has a single buyer, and that's tough for any business to be in, right? For obvious reasons. So just having another another bidder or another person who's on the other end who's offering them a price for their gas is welcome. And there's a whole separate topic around rights to sell, how long a pipeline contract tie-in can be, and so on. Beyond a certain point, many operators are operating on a month-to-month basis, and have more discretion of where they sell and allocate their gas. On the practical side, you know, solving operating problems, obviously, um, dealing with flare gas would fall under this. If they have generators or turbines on site that they're not putting enough gas through, and they need to actually keep, um, you know, generators and turbines are very expensive pieces of equipment. They need, that you can't just run them at low percentages. They need a pretty constant flow through them. So if Bitcoin mining allows them to fully utilize their power generation equipment, even better. And also to retain a mineral lease. Often, so whoever owns the subsurface rights to the minerals leases it to the oil and gas producers. They generally don't own the land they're drilling on. They've leased the rights to explore and drill for minerals in it, and then they pay royalty to the person they're leasing it from. Those contracts are uh, typically contingent on ongoing production. So if your gathering line is shut down, for instance, or the line, for whatever other reason, you don't have a way uh, to transport or monetize gas that would be drilled, you don't drill, and thus you lose your operating lease. So putting it into gensets, into Bitcoin mines can often allow an operator to hold on to a lease that they would otherwise lose for non-production reasons. Um, and then there's the sort of great one when you come across it, is the philosophical one. There are a small but meaningful number of operators who themselves are Bitcoin enthusiasts, and just philosophically believe in DeFi and sound money. That's I don't want to pour cold water on that because I think it's worth finding. I think the my only caution there would be that when you're working with if you're working with a tight window of profitability on the gas price, um, it can be uh, it can be challenging if you're asking somebody else to adopt your business model. You do want to have incentives aligned, but finding an operator who's willing to sell at the right price. Um, one of the fun things about where this industry is right now is the variety of deal structures and profit sharing and sort of alignment on the upside. But the more flexible you can be and still kind of hit your return targets, the better. So, it's always going to narrow your pool of potential operators um, when one of your preconditions is that they believe sufficiently in your business model to really make it their business model as well. So I think we're probably at a good time for switching over to questions. John, I hope that was useful and hopefully, even though we could only go down to a certain level of depth, hopefully a decent practical introduction.
Yeah, I think it really helps a lot. There's going to be some questions coming in. I'm waiting for them to populate the chat. But if you have questions, make sure you do that. We also have a live stream of this going on YouTube. I think one thing that we could answer is a tough question. You talk to a natural gas guy, an oil and gas operator, and they say, I'm getting $3 an MCF. And you say, well, if we make Bitcoin, you can get X amount per MCF. Does it really translate that linearly? I mean, is there a way that you could say that? Or is it is it an abstract where there are two different measures?
Um, are you talking about an instance um, where you're paying them partly in the proceeds from the mining operation?
No, maybe let's say you find an oil and gas guy and he's like, I want to put up a Bitcoin mine, but I'm getting 250 an MCF. What can I get an MCF for mining Bitcoin? Because they're looking at it from their measure.
Oh, I'm sorry, are you talking about an operator looking at
Yeah,
self-mining for this?
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to compare like with like. So, um, you know, for them, the way that they look at the kind of their opportunity cost and alternatives is going to be different than, um, somebody who is more pure play on the Bitcoin mining side, right? Um, there are uh, there are a fair number of assumptions that you have to put in place before we can talk about returns from mining. What machines are you going to have in place? Many of them, what equipment do you already own versus not? Often on the oil and gas side, I think where it gets really interesting is um, in a not insignificant number of cases, there are two other conditions that make it particularly appealing for them, even before we get to the sort of gross returns. One is the potential that they have gen sets and systems already in place, on their land that they're using for just powering operations, right? And the other is in-house familiarity with actually servicing them, and having the people sort of on the ground. So the assumptions that one might make, uh, who for running an off-grid mine and the maintenance costs and what has to be factored in may not apply there. I can think of a couple of operators I know in particular for whom that's been the case. I think when you start talking about uh, anything that starts to veer into guaranteed returns that are contingent upon the price of Bitcoin and yield, you start veering into, um, you know, waters that you have to be careful about from a legal standpoint, because you veer into giving financial advice, certainly.
Yeah.
But I think to the extent that you can lay out with somebody, okay, here's, if you're getting 250 for gas, you also have to know over what period of time is that price locked in? What happens if the price goes down? They talk about the shoulder months quite a bit, the late spring and early fall, where generally gas consumption and electricity use is lower because you're not into peak summer cooling season and you're past the winter heating season where the price tend to be higher. So those shoulder months, they call them. You might see prices dip down. And we see that in the Marcellus shale region in the Northeast, like I think Pennsylvania and Appalachian regions, where I think the swings can go from 350 to 4 per MCF down to 150 to 2,
Oh,
not lower. So
oh.
I know it's not a direct answer to your question, but it's if you're saying like what kind of returns can we talk about with them, I think and again, this is not legal advice or compliance advice. I think it's always appropriate to help someone understand and break down. Here's this is like what I talk about with the calculators. Here's what goes into building up your return expectations, right?
Yeah,
What's the efficiency of your machines? What's the quality of the gas? How much of it are we putting in? And what other costs do we layer in when we think about sort of net return? Um,
yeah,
I suspect I know, some of the messaging that you have in mind when we talk about, hey, you can get, X back on your gas. You're selling it for 2. How does 8 sound? How does 10 sound? Um, those are not fantastical um, outcomes, but they are contingent on some things. And so I'm always more comfortable just breaking it down to what are all of the levers that actually affect that. But
yeah. And
that's my
I heard some of
very.
I heard some of our competitors talking about um, everyone that would walk up, they had a very big number. They said, what are you getting for gas now?" And they'd say, "Well, I can get you this much if you start mining Bitcoin." And so they're
Mhm.
using that as a pitch. So I just wanted to understand how that fit in. I do understand after putting together a number of these systems that yeah, everything matters. Like it's like it seemed like measuring two different measures, two different forms of measuring. So we only have a couple of minutes, and I want to make sure we understand what your site does. DMARC, you are you for deal makers or are you only for operators? You're kind of like a NAPE event, but in a website, kind of, right?
It's a marketplace. So
Yeah.
we are in private right now. I don't know if I mentioned this, but we started the company in early 2024, but maybe very, very end of 23. We're in sort of invite phase now, but we want to be uh, sort of a like the Airbnb for energy projects, and help you abstract away, based on here's, what you have and what you're bringing. We help you fill in the rest of what you need, not just tell you what that is, but actually connect you with here are the potential suppliers, here's the equipment and the models that would actually work with what you're doing. We bring energy projects for compute together. So energy and power sellers with this sort of new class of, we'll call it non-traditional energy buyers, along with the equipment vendors and service providers and other technicians that needed to like configure a project, get it going, and actually facilitate, if it's gas purchase agreements, if it's PPAs. That's what we exist to do, is to kind of bring all of the pieces together and simplify the actual execution of the deals and help make those things successful.
This is
I should have put my email address in here, but hopefully it's um, uh, in the profile or the abstract. But
yeah,
cbonita at dmarkenergy.com. Reach out to me anytime. Love to talk to you about your projects and see how we can help. Yeah, I appreciate
yeah.
it, John.
Yeah, and we're gonna put we're gonna rebroadcast this out to all of our channels. We have uh, quite a robust social media following and Telegram. So we're going to
Indeed.
do some rebroadcasting. We're going to clean up the recordings and make sure that all of your information is there. Christian, thank you so much. Thank you for staying up so late.
Oh, it's
Um,
my pleasure.
I'm a little
I love
envious of
talking about this.
of your time in Spain. That sounds fantastic. Are you going to be at Disrupt, Mining Disrupt?
What are the dates of that again? I've got to look back at my
Uh,
calendar.
26th and 27th of March.
Um, I think so. If not me, some other folks on my team, I think will be there. We're kind of juggling schedules right now, but hope to see you and other folks there. Will you be there?
Yeah. We will, and we're having a little party on the 26th. We'll make sure that we send you all the invites. I'm doing a fishing trip. If you want to join me, you're welcome to. So,
Fishing. All right.
yeah. Great fishing in Fort Lauderdale. So, yeah, I hope to see you there. And if not,
Charmed life.
we'll definitely connect on a call here very soon. Thank you.
Terrific. Thanks for having me, John. Thanks
All
everyone
right.
for joining.